after the fact.
But discussing reputational risks is seen as often as a normal part of companies deciding whether to settle or not, because you might pay an awful lot more settling than you would do going to court. And when John Chapman gave evidence to us, he said that many companies, particularly big companies, pay out because they do not want stuff to be raked up. And was that something you discussed with Tom Crone and Colin Myler? Were you worried that other things would be raked up if this went to court?
There was no discussion necessarily of other things because no other things were mentioned there, but it did seem pointless to take it to court given the fact that it would be probably high profile. The company was certain at the time that it would lose the case, and it was just a question of assessing what the cost of going through that process is, and is there a way to remove that or take that cost or something like it earlier and avoid all of that.
I mean, this is the way things are normally settled in your business, that people come to you, they say, we've got to pay out this money, and rather than really asking why, you just say, well, okay, and you sign it off.
Mr. Collins, I think it's reasons were given to me around the evidence, relevant evidence that was in the case, not with relation to wider spread phone hacking, but with relation to this case and with respect to this case.
But you didn't say...
And it was very strong advice that the company would lose the case.
But you didn't challenge why such a high amount was being recommended. You didn't ask what the QC's opinion was in terms of the appropriate amount to settle. You took Tom Crone and Colin Myler's word for it that was the appropriate amount, and that's what you were going to have to pay.
And that they had sought leading counsel's opinion, and this is where they had come out.
Yeah, but you denied. But if you had have asked, then you would have got a slightly different picture. You'd have understood why. I mean, because it's almost impossible now to look at the Silverleaf document and ignore why he recommends the level of settlement he does, because of the overwhelming evidence against the company that he finds. But in this case, you did. You knew none of that. You didn't know he'd actually recommended a substantially lower amount than you were now being told to sign off. And you didn't ask anyone about it. You just agreed with Tom Crone and let them get on with it.
I was given a range where this litigation was likely to settle. I was told that in the damages estimated by leading counsel, that they had sought leading counsel's opinion, that the estimates plus costs for both sides would land within this range. And I was given strong advice to settle the case, and I went along with that advice.
I mean, I want to say, it may not be the mafia, but it's not management today. It doesn't sound like a sort of textbook example of how you might settle something like this. But
again, I think as just to put this in context, I think while it is a large amount of money, and looking at it in retrospect, we can say, more transparency around the leading counsel's opinion, to be able to actually have seen that, or to have other senior executives outside of the newsroom having seen that. And I don't have any knowledge that anyone did. I certainly didn't. More transparency around some of those things would have been certainly desirable. But in the context of the overall European business, the News International business, and the businesses that I was running, this was something that was within the responsibility of the editor and the legal manager of News Group newspapers. They had come to me with strong advice. They did describe sufficient information to get the authorization that they were seeking, and it was left to them to manage the issue.
So just to be clear, my final question, Mr. Chairman, you never considered any other option other than settling the case at the level that Tom Crone recommended, ultimately, when you had that meeting? I
think the only options available were to go forward litigating the case or to settle the case and think that through. And whether or not there were other questions, I don't recall. I recall leaving that meeting with the clear sense that they would go and do that, and I think that's what they left that meeting with as well, as they testified to you.
Thank you.
Philip Davis.
Just to clarify on some of the points that I'm still a bit unsure about from the answers you've given to Tom Watson and Damien Collins. You're not aware that the meeting took place on the 27th of May, and neither was Colin Myler. I get that. Do you recall, though, at some point saying to Colin Myler, let's wait for the Silks view, which is what was in the note to Julian Pike? Julian Pike said that Colin Myler had rung him up and that you'd said to him, let's wait for the Silks view. Do you recall saying that to Colin Myler?
I don't recall that. I do want to be clear. There's no record or assertion of a meeting. There is a reference to potentially a conversation that neither Mr. Myler nor I recall. It may have happened, but I don't have a recollection of a conversation about waiting for the Silks view.
Okay. But you wanted the opinion of the Silk before you agreed to authorise. That would have been what you wanted. That.
I think if I if they hadn't had a Silk's view when they came to me in the 10th of June, I probably would have asked what leading counsel thought of it, etc. But they did, and they came to me with a recommendation that leading counsel had provided information about.
Okay. So the bit I'm struggling with now, you seem to be indicating to Damien when that you weren't aware of the figure that Michael Silverleaf had quoted as to what the amount could cost. You understood that there was costs on top, but you just said, if I remember rightly, that you weren't actually aware of the exact numbers that Michael Silverleaf gave in his. Am I right?
I was not provided with the document itself at all, and it was described to me a range, and that leading counsel's opinion had been sought, and that this was a reasonable range.
Yeah, it's just that when you came before us last time, you seemed to be very precise about what the Silk's opinion was, because when Adrian Sanders asked you about this last time, your answer to him was that the advice was that the damages could be £250,000, which is absolutely spot on. I mean, that's exactly what he said.
Which, Mr. Davies, is exactly what I just said in answer to Mr. Watson's question.
But when you answered Damien, you seemed to be saying you weren't really entirely sure what the number was that Michael Silverleaf was saying. You just knew that the number plus the cost, whatever. You seemed to be a bit more. Usually, if people come the second time around, they're more on the ball the second time round than they were the first time round. You seem to be more vague this time round than you were the first time round, and I just wonder why that might be the case.
Well, that's certainly not my intent. The recollection that I have very specifically is of some of these, and there were a lot of numbers, I guess, going around. We have the 425 that ultimately it settled for in damages, plus the costs and so on. As I testified earlier, I am aware that Mr. Silverleaf said it could be £250,000, possibly more in damages, and then in these considerations you add on those costs, and I'm trying to be as specific and transparent as I can with you.
The other thing is, when you came last time around, you sort of described this brief meeting on the 10th of June with Colin Myler and Tom Crone. 15 minutes maximum, I think, is how you described it. Today you've twice described it as a substantive meeting, which again seems to be a slightly different emphasis from last time around. How do you sort of explain the discrepancy between a short 15-minute meeting to now a substantive meeting?
I think, first of all, I think I said that it was 15 or 30 minutes. In the diary records, it's, I think, recorded as about 30 minutes. It was scheduled for it. I don't know how long it actually took. I think Mr. Crone said to you it was 15 minutes, but I can't recall. And I refer to it as substantive because it was the only meeting where this material, the question of this thing was discussed in any level of detail. And as I've said to you, exactly what was presented to me at that time, which was sufficient to authorize to give them the authority to go and increase the offer, but no more.
And the sufficient information that you refer to, basically, am I right in thinking, is A, we're going to lose the case, and B, if we lose the case, the cost is going to be $250,000 plus whatever the cost might be of going to court. Is that
Yes.
what you're saying is the sufficient information that you were given to settle it?
And also the existence of evidence that linked the particular voicemail intercept in question to the news of the world, and that was something that I think is, and that is important, and that leading counsel's opinion was that yes, the company would lose the case, and also that a certain amount was, a range that was agreed upon.
What was the basis upon which you arrived at the figure of authorising Farrers to go up to £500,000? What was your rationale for authorising a level up to £500,000?
I think and I don't remember the 500,000 limit, but I think the range that was given to me by Mr. Crone and Mr. Myler, as I have testified to, would be that it would be between 500,000 and $1 million with damages plus costs, and they made a strong recommendation that should be pursued.
But Julian Pike said that when I asked him about, were they prepared to settle this case at any price, or was there a cap at which they were prepared to go up to, in which case, after which they would say, well, that's it, we've been generous enough, we'll see you in court. And he said to me that the 425,000 was getting close to the cap, and when I pressed him, he said the cap was £500,000. Now, that was beyond Tom Crone's authorisation. So, presumably, it must have been you that authorised that they could go up to £500,000, because Julian Pike was very clear that was the amount that he was authorised to go up to settle the case.
Mr. Crone's, certainly £500,000 was beyond Mr. Crone's authorization. I believe Mr. Crone's authorization was much lower with respect to legal settlements, which was some £10,000. And I think it's important just to try to be clear. Mr. Crone and Mr. Myler had already attempted to settle this case at a number of levels before they ever came to me, at a variety of levels, some of which appear to be above their authority.
And so
because it was £10,000.
So
Mr. Crone.
who'd given them the authority to try and settle at a lesser amount than you were agreeing to, but at higher amounts than that they were authorised to give? Who'd given that authorisation?
Certainly in the documents that I've seen recently and that you've seen as well, it appears that Mr. Crone took it upon himself to authorize a settlement of $50,000 and then $150,000. And I certainly didn't authorize that, nor the increase to $350,000 that came later. That was not at my authorization, nor do I have any records, and we've looked quite hard at this, to find any records of other authorizations, other executives at News International who could have done so, the chief financial officer, for example, and there's no record of any of that.
So Tom Crone's got the authority to settle for up to $10,000, and yet completely unilaterally he's instructing your lawyers to settle a case for $150,000, $250,000 without any authority from anybody else, even though his authority level is £10,000. That's what you. That's the.
Presumably, he and Mr. Myler and Mr. Pike had discussed those things, but they did not come to me until the 10th of June, as I've said.
So I still come back to the same question, which is, on what basis did you give the authority to settle it for up to... Who gave the £500,000 cap to Julian Pike then?
Certainly at the June 10th meeting, a range was discussed, and if that was the cap that Mr. Crone wanted to give to Mr. Pike, that was there. I had agreed certainly with them that within a range, as we discussed, something above £500,000 when you include costs, that they had the authority to go out and try to settle it, which is their advice that they had given me.
So what did you, had you given them a cap? You say something above 500,000. That's like a minimum. I'm on about what was the cap?
It was a cap. I think the point here is the damages number plus then the costs of both sides to litigate it. And I don't recall the discussion of a cap on damages, although it would have been not. It would have been quite normal to say, go and have a go at this number. But I don't recall that.
Did you give a cap or not?
Well, certainly I didn't imply that that they could settle at any number. I want to be absolutely clear about that. They gave me a range, and within that range, I said they can go and pursue the settlement.
And so, did they come back to seek your authorization when they'd got a figure upon which had been agreed? Did they have to come back and for you to then say, yeah, okay, let's go with that?
They had authority to go and settle the case within the range that they had presented to me. Whether or not they came back with some, there was a confirmation of what had happened or how it had gone at some point in the future, there were no subsequent meetings with the two of them on the subject, but they may have called me or had a confirmatory discussion in that way.
You see, the problem I have is it all seems very cavalier to me, and very cavalier with money. Given that your organisation is so successful, I can't believe you've been so successful by being so cavalier with money. You sort of pay off somebody, an employee who's been to prison, you give them £250,000 without a blink of an eye to pay them off, even though they've been to prison and brought the company into disrepute. You agree to settle cases with no real cap put in place, but just a sort of a ballpark figure that people are left to go along with. You think that the company should have a counsel's opinion, but you don't ask to even see the opinion when it comes, even when it's a substantial amount of money. And the bit I have a problem with is that you seem to characterise this, your sort of defence for this sort of cavalier approach is that, well, this is the news of the world, it's a tiny part of our business, I can't be bothered trifling about with these sorts of things. I used to work for Asda. I don't know how big Asda is compared to News Corporation.
I think it's owned by Walmart. It's big.
Exactly. Asda is owned by Walmart. Now, I'm pretty safe in saying Walmart is bigger than News Corporation. I think Walmart's probably the biggest. Absolutely. Now, I know that the chief operating officer of Asda, which may be a small part of Walmart, but still a not inconsiderable part, but a relatively small part of Walmart, I guarantee that if somebody had gone to him and said, here we've got a problem, a legal case is going to cost us in the region of £500,000, any chief operating officer of Asda I've ever